I was sipping my late morning coffee, letting the steam curl up like little whispers, when I started scrolling through the community newsletter online. At first, it was the usual stuff: announcements, raffle winners, neighbors in their evening wear. But then my heart stopped cold. There he was, David, standing in photo after photo with a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, her arm brushing his like they belonged together, both of them smiling as if they shared a private joke. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor had given out beneath me. The walls of my kitchen suddenly pressed in tighter, the hum of the refrigerator grew louder, and even the ticking of the wall clock stabbed at my ears. I blinked, praying I was seeing it wrong. But no, photo after photo proved it. David had been at the gala, dressed to the nines, playing the part of a devoted companion. And the cruelest part? He'd never mentioned a single word to me about being there. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. He wasn't just in one snapshot. He was in every angle, every group shot, always with her. It wasn't just coincidence, it was a pattern. That kind of closeness, the way their bodies leaned toward each other, wasn't something you fake for a camera. My pulse pounded in my ears, and for the first time, I wondered if I'd been the only one left in the dark while the whole neighborhood saw the truth. By the time David walked through the door that evening, I was already waiting with the tablet in my hands. My palms were damp, but my voice came out sharp, steadier than I felt. Care to explain why the whole community thinks you and this woman are the power couple of the fundraiser? I asked, holding the screen up so he couldn't avoid it. He froze, his eyes flicking from the photos to my face, and then he gave this nervous chuckle that made my blood boil. "Oh, that?" he muttered, scratching the back of his neck like a teenager caught sneaking out. "She's just a colleague. We happened to walk in together." His words hung in the air, flimsy and weak, like paper trying to shield against fire. My jaw tightened. "Strange," I shot back, "that she's glued to your side in every photo. And strange you never even mentioned the event at all." My chest burned with anger, but underneath it, I felt the ache of betrayal already settling in. That's when his mask slipped. "You're overreacting, Elena. It's nothing," he snapped, his voice harsher than I expected. Nothing. That word pierced deeper than any confession could have. I stood there, gripping the tablet like it was the only thing holding me upright. He wanted me to believe this was meaningless, but my gut screamed otherwise. And when you've lived with someone long enough, you know the difference between a careless excuse and a well-worn lie. I went quiet after that, but inside, my thoughts were spinning like a storm. Nothing? He had the nerve to call this nothing? Every photo screamed intimacy, every smile told a story, and yet he looked me dead in the eye as if I were the fool. I could feel my face burning, part fury, part humiliation. It wasn't just that he'd been caught. It was the way he dismissed me, as if my instincts, my feelings, didn't matter at all. I've always prided myself on being patient, on giving people the benefit of the doubt, but that night, I felt something shift deep inside me. The trust I had spent years building, brick by brick, cracked like glass under pressure. I watched him pace the room, avoiding my eyes, trying to act like this conversation was beneath him. And the more he downplayed it, the more certain I became that I wasn't imagining a single thing. He was hiding something, and I was finally ready to see it for what it was. Lying in bed later, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me, I knew I couldn't let it go. My chest felt heavy, my mind restless, replaying those photos in an endless loop. She wasn't a colleague, not with the way she leaned into him, not with the way he smiled back. No, this wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. And I promised myself that the truth, no matter how ugly, was going to come out. The next morning, while David left for work whistling like nothing had happened, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before I started typing her name into every community page I could find. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but deep down, I already knew I'd find it. And I did. There she was again. Same woman, same dazzling smile, standing right next to David at another fundraiser from just last month. My heart thudded so loudly I could hear it echo in my ears. Each new photo was like a punch to the gut, He wasn't just slipping out for work commitments. He was parading her around in public, confident enough to think I'd never notice. My hands shook as I scrolled, one picture bleeding into the next, their closeness undeniable. And with every image, my anger solidified into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't crazy. He was the liar. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sarah, my closest friend, before my courage faded. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. "Look at this," I whispered, sending her the photos. My throat was tight, but rage steadied me. Sarah gasped as soon as they popped up on her screen. "He's practically parading her around town," she said, her voice trembling with fury. I nodded through my tears, my silence more powerful than any scream. Sarah's voice grew sharper the longer she stared at the photos. "He's arrogant, Elena. He actually thought no one would show you these? That no one would connect the dots?" Her outrage lit a fire under me. She was right. David wasn't just careless. He was bold enough to think he could humiliate me in plain sight and get away with it. I could almost hear his smug laugh echoing in my head, that same laugh he used when he thought he had the upper hand. I wiped my eyes, anger burning hotter than the ache in my chest. "Good," I said, my voice steadier now. "If he wants to make it public, then I'll make the fallout public too." Saying it out loud made something shift inside me. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman who'd been handed proof, and proof was power. My hands stopped trembling. My pulse slowed. For the first time in days, I felt in control. Sarah leaned closer to the phone, her tone low, but electric. "Then promise me this. Don't let him spin this back on you. He'll try to make you feel crazy, to rewrite what's plain as day. Don't give him that chance." I promised her I wouldn't. My mind was already racing, sketching the outlines of what came next. Every lie he'd told was fuel, and I wasn't about to waste it. Not anymore. That night, while David sat across from me at dinner chatting about work like nothing was wrong, I watched him more closely than ever. Every word he spoke felt rehearsed, every gesture calculated. And all I could think about were the photos, her hand brushing his arm, his smile softening in ways it rarely did for me anymore. It wasn't jealousy that churned in my stomach, it was humiliation. He wasn't just betraying me, he was making a spectacle of me. After he went to bed, I slipped into the living room and pulled the photos back up on my phone. I studied them in silence, every detail sharper under the glow of the screen. His tuxedo, her sequined dress, the way they leaned toward each other as if the world around them didn't exist. My gut twisted, but this time it wasn't despair. It was resolve. These pictures weren't going to break me. They were going to become my weapon. As I turned off the phone, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. My eyes looked different, fierce, unflinching. For years, I had let him dictate the narrative, dismiss my suspicions, silence my questions. But not anymore. This time, I wasn't going to shrink back into silence. I was going to take everything he'd flaunted so carelessly and use it to strip away the one thing he valued most, his image. By the time dinner rolled around the next evening, my plan was set. I laid the printed photos on the table, face down, like cards in a game only I knew the rules to. When David walked in, loosening his tie and muttering about traffic, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I waited until he sat down, reached for his fork, and then slid the photos across the table. "These are from 3 different community events," I said, my voice even. "Are you still going to call her a colleague?" He froze, fork hovering midair. His eyes darted down to the glossy images, then back up to me, his face draining of color. "You've been spying on me?" he barked, the accusation sharp, desperate. My jaw tightened. "No," I shot back, slamming my palm on the table. "You've been flaunting your mistress in public, David, and you were too stupid to realize the whole neighborhood has cameras." My voice cracked like a whip, and for once, he had no smug grin to hide behind. The silence between us thickened, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. His chest rose and fell faster, the mask of control slipping right off his face. "It was a mistake," he finally muttered, his voice smaller, thinner. "It doesn't mean anything." I leaned forward, my eyes locking on his. It means everything. You didn't just betray me. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know, and you'll regret every single moment you thought you could lie to my face. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping the floor, the sound grating like nails on glass. You're blowing this out of proportion, he snapped, his voice rising. It wasn't serious, Elena. You're making it into some kind of scandal. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms, but I kept my voice steady. A scandal? You managed that all on your own. Every time you walked into those rooms with her on your arm, you made me the fool without even giving me the chance to know it. His eyes flashed with anger, but there was fear there too. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes their mask has been ripped away in plain daylight. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he muttered, almost to himself. The words were pathetic, hollow. I watched him crumble, and instead of feeling pity, I felt a cold strength rise inside me. I stood, pressing my palms flat against the table, leaning into the space between us. You paraded her like she was your prize, David, and you thought I'd never see it. But now I have. And here's the thing. You can't take it back. Not the photos, not the whispers, not the shame you've branded me with. You've built this mess, and I'm the one who's going to decide what comes next. He slumped back into his chair, rubbing his temples like the weight of it all was finally crashing down. Elena, please, he muttered, his tone softening as if pity might undo the damage. But pity was long gone from my heart. I studied him, this man who had once been my safe place, now reduced to a stranger clutching at excuses. For years I'd bent myself into patience, into forgiveness. Tonight, I felt none of it. Only fire. I don't want your pleas, David, I said quietly, though every word cut like steel. You didn't just gamble with our marriage, you gambled with my dignity. And in case you haven't noticed, I don't play games I can't win. His eyes widened at that, maybe for the first time realizing the power had shifted. He wasn't the one cornering me anymore. I was the one holding the truth, and the truth was heavy enough to crush him. As I gathered the photos back into a neat stack, I felt the pieces of a plan forming in my mind. He thought the exposure ended here, within these four walls, but I knew better. His betrayal wasn't hidden, it was public, and if he wanted to humiliate me in front of our neighbors, then I was ready to return the favor on a stage even bigger than the one he'd chosen. The very next morning, while David left for work pretending everything was back to normal, I was already making calls. My voice stayed calm, even sweet, as I spoke with the community committee. I offered to sponsor the next big event, my name on the program, my contribution at the center. They were delighted, of course. I hung up the phone with a smile, my pulse thrumming with a new kind of energy. This wasn't about chasing him anymore. This was about reclaiming myself. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I threw myself into preparations. Dresses, hair, every detail carefully chosen. I wanted to walk into that ballroom not as the betrayed wife, but as the woman who owned her story. Every time I thought about David and his mistress showing up side by side, I felt the sting lessen. Because this time I wasn't going to sit home and swallow my humiliation. I was going to make sure the room belonged to me. The night of the event, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the silk gown that fit me like a second skin. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Stronger, sharper, unapologetically radiant. As I slipped on my earrings, I whispered to my reflection, "He gave me the stage. Now I'll take the spotlight." With one last breath, I stepped into the night, ready to turn the tables in front of everyone who thought they already knew the story. When I arrived, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and chatter, the kind of place where appearances meant everything. Heads turned as I walked in, my dress catching the light, and for once, I didn't shrink under their gaze. I lifted my chin, smiling warmly, shaking hands, accepting compliments. I felt their eyes scanning for David, but when they realized I had come alone, a ripple of curiosity ran through the crowd. That curiosity was exactly what I wanted. And then, almost on cue, David walked in with her. My heart gave a small jolt, but I didn't flinch. She clung to his arm, eyes scanning the room like she was the one being crowned queen. I almost laughed. The truth was, I didn't need to force a scene. Their very presence together was proof enough, and I could feel whispers already beginning to stir like wildfire. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I drifted toward a cluster of neighbors, my smile steady, my voice carrying just enough. "Funny thing," I said, tilting my glass. "I found out my husband was already taken at these events, so I thought I'd come as myself tonight. Turns out I look better without the dead weight." The laughter around me was low, a mix of shock and admiration, but it spread quickly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David's face darken, his jaw tighten, and I knew in that moment the spotlight was mine. The whispers grew louder with every passing minute, like a current shifting through the room. I caught snippets. "Did you hear what she said? She looks stunning, doesn't she? Poor David. He deserves it." Their voices were my soundtrack, fueling me with every sidelong glance and nod of approval. For once, I wasn't the woman being pitied. I was the woman reclaiming her narrative, right in front of the very people who had once been blind to the truth. I sipped my champagne slowly, savoring the taste of victory as David tried to hold his composure. He forced smiles, shook hands, but I could see the panic flashing in his eyes, the way he avoided mine. She stayed close to him, clinging tighter now, but even she could sense the shift. The crowd wasn't admiring them. They were dissecting them. My words had lit the fuse, and now their perfect little facade was burning down in real time. As I made my way toward the stage for the opening toast, I felt an almost electric calm. This wasn't about revenge in the form of cruelty. It was about exposure, clarity. David had written the script by parading his mistress in public, but I had rewritten the ending. And as the microphone was placed in my hand, I realized I wasn't just taking back the spotlight, I was taking back myself. The night after the gala, the house felt heavier than ever. David stormed in, still seething from the whispers and sideways glances he couldn't silence. He dropped his jacket on a chair, his voice sharp. "Elena, you didn't have to humiliate me like that." I stayed calm, folding one of his shirts into a suitcase I'd already set out. "Humiliate you?" I said softly, my hands steady. "No, David. You did that all by yourself. I just refused to clean up your mess." His face flushed, his fists tightening at his sides. "We can fix this," he pleaded, his tone slipping between anger and desperation. "Don't throw it all away." I looked up at him, my heart strangely light despite the years I'd poured into this marriage. "Fix it? You didn't just betray me in private, you embarrassed me in front of the whole community. I won't live as the punchline to your affair. That's not a marriage, David. That's a prison." I turned back to the suitcase, tucking in the last of his ties. The silence stretched between us, thick and final. He didn't move, didn't protest further, just stood there watching as I zipped it shut. For once, the power wasn't his. It was mine, and I felt it in the calm rhythm of my breathing, in the quiet strength of my hands. He had taken so much from me, but at that moment, I was giving him nothing more. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and bitter. "You'll regret this, Elena," he spat, trying to wound me with the same arrogance that once kept me small, but his words bounced off me like dull arrows. I lifted the suitcase, set it firmly by the door, and met his glare with a calm that unnerved him. "No, David," I said, my tone like ice. "You're the one who'll regret this. You mistook my patience for weakness, and now you've learned the difference." He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. His shoulders sagged, his bravado crumbling under the weight of his own downfall. I stood there, watching the man who once held my heart reduced to a shadow of himself. Not out of pity, but with a clarity I'd never had before. For years, I had carried the burden of his choices. Tonight, I was finally setting it down. I opened the door, the night air cool against my skin, and gestured toward the darkness outside. "Take your suitcase and go, David." His eyes darted around the room as if searching for something to tether him here, but there was nothing left. Not the love, not the respect, not even the pretense of a future together. The only thing waiting for him now was the silence of his own mistakes. He hesitated for a long moment, his hand on the suitcase handle, his eyes searching mine for some last trace of mercy. But I gave him none. Whatever softness he had once known in me was gone, stripped away by his betrayal. At last, he pulled the suitcase over the threshold, his footsteps heavy as he disappeared into the night. I closed the door behind him, the quiet click of the lock sounding like the final nail in a coffin. The house seemed to exhale with me, the air suddenly lighter without his presence. I stood in the silence, my heart racing but steady, my hands trembling not with fear but with release. I walked through each room, noticing how different they felt now, less crowded, less heavy. For the first time in years, it was just my space, my sanctuary, free from the constant shadow of his lies. As I sank onto the couch, I felt the sting of tears, but they weren't the bitter kind. They were tears of liberation, of finally cutting away the weight that had chained me for too long. He thought I'd beg, thought I'd crumble. But instead, I had shown him the one truth he never believed. I was stronger without him. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something entirely mine. Months later, I found myself back in that same community hall, but this time, everything felt different. My name was printed proudly on the programs, my voice carried weight in the planning meetings, and neighbors who once only waved politely now leaned in with genuine admiration. I wasn't the woman whispered about behind closed doors anymore. I was the one they looked to with respect, the one who had faced fire and walked out unburned. David, on the other hand, had become a ghost in our circle. His face still appeared here and there, but always alone, always with that hollow look of a man who had lost more than he could ever admit. The mistress was gone, of course, vanished as quickly as she had appeared when the spotlight turned harsh. And without her, without me, he had nothing left to stand on. His shine had dulled, his charm dissolved into something pitiful. One crisp afternoon, I sat with Sarah at a cafe, the kind of day where the sunlight feels like forgiveness. She stirred her coffee, smirking as she glanced toward the street. He thought he'd shine in the spotlight. Now look at him, burned by it. I lifted my cup, smiling peacefully, a warmth settling in my chest. He gave me the photos, he gave me the stage, I said. All I had to do was take back the light.